Oh, well, the NFL and the Colts giving us a reason to raise our eyebrows today because why? Jonathan Taylor set to practice after an eventful summer that included him asking for a trade out of Indy. Taylor began this year on the PUP list, but he's eligible to be activated as early as this weekend's game against the Titans. Many fantasy owners that took a chance maybe later rounds to draft Taylor, maybe hoping looking at these numbers they get the JT from 2021 where he played 17 games, just over 106 yards per game there. But then 2022, a dip in those numbers. Of course, a lot of injuries along the way. So we'll see what happens here as he maybe returns as early as this Sunday. Somebody is already returning back into my life, my guy, Dave Richard, the Hall of Famer, fantasy guru, I call him all the time. We got to talk about JT because I didn't take a pass on him. Some people actually passed on him. Thoughts now? Are we buying? You know what? Maybe week 5, I should put him in that starting lineup.
I think if he's back in week 5, and whenever that first game is, you should be hesitant to put him in your lineup because Shane Steichen's already hinted on it. They're going to rotate him in for his first game. And let's lay out a couple of facts first on Jonathan Taylor. He hasn't practiced since mid-December of last year with a different coaching staff and a different quarterback and a different playbook. So he's never really had an opportunity to get on the field and work with the elements that the Colts have right now. That's issue number 1. Issue number 2, are we sure he still doesn't want to get traded? Are we sure he still doesn't want to get held out? Might that impact how he plays when he comes back? That's another key. And then the third one, and this is what we talked about all offseason before there was an injury, before there was a holdout, does he have the same upside with Anthony Richardson as his quarterback? Because what do we know about Richardson? What's already been proven through the first 4 weeks of the season? Richardson will run, and that'll take rushing numbers away from Jonathan Taylor, including near the goal line. So these are all factors that make me a little bit nervous about Taylor hitting that upside. I think right now is actually the time to try and sell very high. I am using those 2 words, very high on Jonathan Taylor if you can. If you can't, eventually he'll be back. I think he could be good for close to what he was in 2022 when he was healthy, maybe a little bit better yardage-wise, but not necessarily somebody that's going to race to be a top 3 fantasy running back. You can float him out there to your league mates, see what kind of offers you get. If there's 1 or 2 that you absolutely love, take it, because I'm not sure, like I said, he'll be a top 5 fantasy runner.
So, of course, week 5 is some of the things that we have to uncover. Of course, we have bye weeks. So there are some guys you might want to add that will affect those teams out there. One of the guys, the top guys coming in this week here, Dave, you got Jalil McKinnon out of Denver. Thoughts on that?
I think he's their most explosive running back. And if he's going to play a lot more because there's no Javonte Williams this week, then he would be a number 2 rusher against the Jets. And it's not an easy matchup against the Jets, but we have seen running backs put up some good numbers against them. The thing that I like best about McLaughlin is that he's such a smooth cutter. He's got that burst, and he can catch the ball out of the backfield. And we've seen Russell lean on his running backs a little bit more than we're used to seeing from him in this Denver offense. That's a staple of Sean Payton, by the way. And speaking of Payton, there is a track record of that coach finding undrafted running backs and turning them into fantasy stars. You'll remember Chris Ivory. You had him for a cup of coffee during his fantasy years, but you'll definitely remember Pierre Thomas. That dude was excellent for fantasy. McLaughlin's faster than both of these guys. Love that he was added in so many leagues. There is rest of season potential for him to be a low end, maybe middle to low end number 2 fantasy running back, depending on how things go with P. Ryan and Javonte moving forward.
All right, you see the numbers there for week 4 against the Bears for McLaughlin. 19 points for you there if you already had them, but still available when it comes to most added there. How about the QBs? There's a rookie out there, then a second-year guy you might want to look into.
So let's start with Sam Howell because he's got the matchup on Thursday against Chicago, and there are fantasy managers that might need to make a decision on him because they're missing Justin Herbert this week, Deshaun Watson for this week. Bye weeks are taking a toll, and maybe you don't trust Joe Burrow and you'd rather go with Howell. I'd do it. I know that Burrow just hasn't looked like himself over basically the season. And Howell, we've seen him put up some good numbers, at least 20 fantasy points each of his last 2 games, including against Philadelphia. He needed some rushing numbers to get it done against the Eagles, but this is a drop down in opponents here against the Bears. They cannot pressure the quarterback. Their secondary is beat up. Russell Wilson just had a monster game against them. I think Howell can have a good game against Chicago. I wouldn't start him and expect 25 to 30 fantasy points.
Okay.
This might be a matchup where Washington can just run the ball ball well. Brian Robinson is a must start, but I think Howell can find at least one touchdown, and I think he can get you close to 230 yards in the game. What he does rushing will help, and maybe he rushes for a touchdown. We've seen that from him before. So he's one of my favorite bye-week replacement quarterbacks, and the other is C.J. Stroud. We know that C.J. Stroud has absolutely stepped up and been a big-time stud for the Houston Texans. Even my dad called me to tell me about, hey, this C.J. Stroud guy, have you heard of him? Yeah, Dad, he was my favorite quarterback in the draft process coming out. I've seen a thing or two from him. No interceptions so far this season. That's good. He's making use of his receivers. That's great. And he's playing behind an offensive line that on paper looks awful, but he's making it work. He's accurate under pressure. I think he keeps it up. 20 or more fantasy points in each of his last 3 games. Fantasy managers who can still stash Stroud should do it. Say that 10 times fast.
Not just playing like maybe the best rookie out there, but maybe one of the top 10, 15 guys through week 4 already.
Yeah,
kind of
he's
crazy
up there.
to think that.
He's up there. Yeah, he's a good quarterback, no doubt about it. And when that offensive line gets better, he'll be better.
What about those pass catchers, the guy making a return here?
So one guy that I like is actually Michael Wilson, who had a big game for Arizona in week number 4. And I love what I've seen from this kid. He's actually improved since he was in college. He's big, he's strong, and for a guy who's as tall as he is, he moves really well. And he's got some great route versatility as well. He can beat man coverage, can beat zone coverage. It's been 2 weeks now where we've seen big plays from Michael Wilson, and we know this Cardinals offense really isn't as bad as we thought that it would be over the course of the season. And so I think that Michael Wilson has a chance to actually end up being helpful for fantasy football managers. You can go and still grab him in some leagues. He's still out there, those 10-team leagues. Make it a point to do it. He's a good bench receiver with potential to be maybe a high-end number 3 receiver by the time we get to November and December. Now, the other receiver that's worth talking about is Jamison Williams in Detroit, because we know what kind of upside he is. We saw him at Alabama. He was outrunning everybody.
Speedster.
And he is a speedster. He's tall, he's lean, but we just haven't seen it yet in the pros. And so it's a little tough to trust him. And I don't think the Lions are going to rush him back and just anoint him the number 1 wide receiver for them. Amon-Ra St. Brown is there. They're getting great numbers out of Laporta. He's going to be a field stretcher. He's taking the top off. That will open things up for St. Brown and Laporta. And if defenses don't play them properly, you better believe Jared Goff will try and find him deep. He could end up being like Gabe Davis in Buffalo. Davis doesn't get a ton of targets from week to week, but the ones that he gets, they're deep down the field. And when he makes defenses pay, the numbers are great for fantasy. That's how I would look at Jamison Williams moving forward. You can stash him, see where you're at in 2 or 3 weeks. If you're not really seeing anything from him, if he's not getting a lot of playing time, then you'll move on from him.
We got a little flash last year, of course, of him those
like
last
2
couple
plays.
of games.
2 plays.
That's all we needed, though. That's all we needed.
Well, I wish we had seen more, because then we'd be rolling. It's nice that he's back from a suspension early too. That was good on the NFL.
Tight ends, by the way, I have Pat Freiermuth, and clearly he's on the show for a couple days.
Yeah.
Well, probably more than that, actually.
You're going to be without him this week, and then they have a bye. And so I think when they come back from the bye, they play against the Rams. Would you be considering him against the Rams, or would you look for a tight end to maybe replace him between now and then?
I need somebody to replace him.
You need another tight end.
Others are probably out there the same way.
There's 3 guys that I like. Let's start with Cole Kmet, who just had a monster game for the Bears, and it's against those Broncos, and the Broncos defense is terrible. And there was a lot of busted coverage in that game. But the thing that I noticed about Cole Kmet is that his target share has gone up without Chase Claypool on the field, as much as 28% in week number 4. This is the number 2 pass catcher in Chicago's offense. You know who number 1 is. That's going to be DJ Moore. But I think Cole Kmet does have some staying power, especially in PPR leagues, as a startable fantasy tight end. Oh, look. Check that out.
Who said that? That's
so,
you.
like, the first 3 games, his target share was okay, around 18%. And then with Claypool gone, it's 28%. And then look at that. The snaps in 3 games when Claypool was active for the Bears, he only ran 20 routes, but he had a target share of 35% on those routes. That's huge, because he's huge. He's a big body target that Justin Fields can lean on. But that's just one of 3 tight ends that we can talk about. Jake Ferguson in Dallas is another one. He's kind of taken over that Dalton Schultz role for Dak Prescott. Clearly, there's a tendency for Dak to look for that tight end, and he's come through in the red zone. So that's a tight end. I'd probably put him ahead of Cole Kmet as a tight end to go and grab. He's just rostered in so many leagues that it might be hard to find him, but that's the perfect guy to go and get and pair with Pat Freiermuth. You're going to use Ferguson for a couple weeks, and then you might use him the rest of the season because he's been getting such a good target share. And then last but not least is Zach Ertz in the desert in Arizona. I'm a little worried about him because I think Michael Wilson becomes the number 2 guy there, and Ertz kind of falls back to to number 3. Ertz had a chance to score a touchdown last week, dropped it. That's never a good thing. But his target share has actually been good over the past first 4 weeks of the season. And I would imagine that you will continue to see him be a candidate, more so in PPR leagues than non-PPR leagues, 9, 10, 11 points per game. Not necessarily has the same upside as Kmet, and certainly not as high as Ferguson, but he's widely available, so you might not have a choice. If Kmet's gone, if Ferguson's gone, Ertz is the tight end to go and pick up.
All right, per usual, Dave Richard getting us on the same page as pen and paper. And if you missed any of that, he'll be back at it again with the fellas, Jamie and Heath, as always. Fantasy football today, you can catch them. Look, it's week 5, Thursday tomorrow, so we get a game. And then Sunday, we have 4 teams on a bye, so you might want to check in and add some of those players on that roster. Download and give them a subscribe.